As the saying goes, men lie, women lie, numbers don't. But that's not always the case when it comes to fantasy football. Sometimes the numbers don't tell the full story, and it's up to us to uncover the context needed to fully understand the truth. In this series, I'll be going through the truth of every high selected fantasy player's 2022 season, uncovering any contextual patterns I can find, and painting the picture for what we can potentially expect from them moving forward. But with that being said, let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. All right, starting off with the Underdog Fantasy 101 in ADP, and that is going to be the wide receiver out of Minnesota, Justin Jefferson. Obviously going to be going as the wide receiver one off the board, going as the 101 overall. And the context I wanted to pull from his 2022 season was just how his splits looked with TJ Hawkinson getting traded to Minnesota by week 9. And you guys can see that the effect of TJ Hawkinson on Justin Jefferson's bottom line was pretty minuscule. Yes, he affected the target share a tiny bit, going from obviously 29.3% down to 28.38. But we do see the bottom line actually increase when it comes to Jefferson. 21.7 seasonal fantasy points per game jumps up to about 23.6 fantasy points per game, which would have equated to the wide receiver one across a full season. So what the split tells us is that Justin Jefferson is an absolute cheat code. He is a superstar caliber wide receiver. And while some may think, the presence of TJ Hawkinson would have limited his target share, and of course, like I said, the slight downtick was actually there, it was met with more valuable targets and a more sustained offensive success, which directly impacted his touchdown rate. So in this stretch, 9 games with Hawkinson, he scored 6 touchdowns in this stretch, only 2 in the 8 games without TJ Hawkinson on the field. I am more than fine taking Justin Jefferson with the 101. He is an absolute stud. Yes, like I said, 28.38, while it's not 29.3, is still a fine target share, especially when you're talking about the fact that it equated to 12 targets per game in this stretch. Don't overthink it. Justin Jefferson is the 101. He should be everyone's 101 in fantasy football entering 2023. But we go on to the 102, and that is going to be his LSU counterpart, Ja'Marr Chase of the Cincinnati Bengals, obviously going off as the wide receiver 2 off the board. And for the context of his 2022 season, we're going to be looking at his splits when healthy, subtracting that Bills game. Obviously, in that Bills game, we know the tragedy that happened with Damar Hamlin on the field. Ja'Marr Chase in this game actually had a complete goose egg on his line that affected his overall seasonal average. So you guys can see that his seasonal average, 18.6 PPR points per game, was still a very good mark. Would have equated to the wide receiver 6 in fantasy football. But when we subtract the Bills game, we do see that this was a legitimate 20 PPR point per game wide receiver on 11 targets per game. And it's pretty hilarious that we saw, Ja'Marr Chase as a rookie put up these league winner level numbers despite turning out some low volume. He turned from an extremely efficient low volume wide receiver, like I mentioned, to a guy that was absolutely dominating the targets on one of the top offenses in the entire NFL with Cincinnati, commanding a near 29% target share on that loaded Bengals offense. He is my clear 102, given the youth advantage, given the flexibility at the top of your drafts. If you take Ja'Marr Chase, you know that he is going to threaten for the wide receiver 1 overall in fantasy in 2023, and he's got youth on his side. I really do think that these 2 LSU wide receivers should be the no-brainer wide receiver 1 and 2 in everybody's rankings. 103 off the board is going to have its first running back, and that's going to be Christian McCaffrey, running back from the San Francisco 49ers, obviously going off the board as the RB1 overall. 103 overall on Underdog Fantasy. But when we're looking at the season of Christian McCaffrey, we look at his splits as a San Francisco 49er when Elijah Mitchell was healthy. I'm excluding week 7 against KC because Christian McCaffrey played like 28% of the snaps in this game. But the other 3 games that he shared the field with Elijah Mitchell, it says a lot in terms of his seasonal output versus what the split would indicate. So his seasonal output, obviously we know, league-winning caliber running back, played his 17 games, finished as the RB2, ended up averaging 21 PPR points per game. But if we're looking directly at this split with Elijah Mitchell healthy, 14.73 PPR points per game, and he saw his opportunity counts with a healthy Mitchell drop from 25 opportunities per game in the 6 games with San Francisco without Mitchell to 17 opportunities per game in the 3 games with Elijah Mitchell on the field. For a 27-year-old running back with an injury history, that really gives me pause on potentially spending a top 5 pick on McCaffrey entering the 2023 season. I know that sounds a little hyperbolic because we know how good this guy has been in the past, but I would just rather take one of the stud wide receivers at the top. I already mentioned the LSU guys, got a couple guys I will mention in a second as well, but for that reason, I'm going to be out at cost when it comes to Christian McCaffrey. I would just prefer to wait on the other 2 running backs that are going in this round rather than spend a premium price on Christian McCaffrey being a top half of the first round type of caliber fantasy pick. The 104 is going to be Cooper Kupp of the Los Angeles Rams. Obviously, the wide receiver 3 off the board, 104 overall. And for the truth of his season, we look at the splits for Cooper Kupp when both him and quarterback Matthew Stafford were healthy. And we see that his seasonal output obviously was phenomenal in its own right, 22.4 PPR points per game. But we do see that when Matthew Stafford was healthy, this was a legitimate near 25 PPR point per game score on nearly 12 targets per game. What the split tells us is that in the early portion of the season, prior to Cooper Kupp's season-ending ankle sprain, he was giving league-winning level production. He showed no signs of slowing down from that record-setting 2021 campaign he had. I believe he had about 145 receptions, over 1,900 receiving yards, and 16 receiving touchdowns in that year. Well, if you guys see his paces, 9 receptions per game, 101.6 receiving yards per game, and 0.75 receiving touchdowns per game. If you spread that across a full 17-game pace, he would have put up nearly identical numbers to that 2021 breakout. So while the injury concern is there, he's an older player. We don't exactly know what this offense is going to look like. We don't exactly know if Matthew Stafford is going to be fully healthy coming back from that elbow injury. I still think the upside alone has to make him a top of the first round type of fantasy pick. And realistically, if he didn't have the age concerns or the Matthew Stafford concerns, I do think that Cooper Kupp would be well in contention for the 101 off the board, even over the likes of a guy like Justin Jefferson, like he was in debates last year. Obviously, the debates last year were Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, who should I take 101? I think Cooper Kupp is still that same quality player. He just has a little bit more injury concerns, a little bit more age concerns than the other 2 wide receivers above him in ADP. 105 is going to be Tyreek Hill, wide receiver of the Miami Dolphins, currently ranked as the wide receiver 4 in ADP, 105 overall. And for the truth of his season, we look at his splits when Tua Tagovailoa was fully healthy. So I'm excluding the games against Buffalo and Cincinnati where he was clearly concussed. And you see the seasonal output of Tyreek Hill change dramatically. He goes from a player that was averaging 20.1 PPR points per game across the full season to a guy that when Tua was healthy averaged nearly 22.4 PPR points per game. The split tells us that as long as the quarterback play is up to par with the breakout that Tua Tagovailoa represented in 2022, Tyreek was one of the most valuable players in fantasy football, and in my opinion, is a clear top 5 overall value in drafts for 2023. So like I said, I'm fading Christian McCaffrey at the 103 because I would much rather have Cooper Kupp or Tyreek Hill going right after him. You guys just saw, like I said, the upside for each of these wide receivers is up to the par of Christian McCaffrey. Not to mention the risk factor is much less when you're talking about some of these standout players. So for me personally, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill are inside my top 4, and then I'd probably shift McCaffrey down to 5 or 6 for my rankings. But speaking of the 106, we got Travis Kelce, the first tight end off the board from the Kansas City Chiefs. And for the context of his season, for the truth of his season, we look at his splits with Jerick McKinnon's increased involvement down the stretch. So we do see the overall seasonal output, 18.6 PPR points per game. His split output, only 13.52 PPR points per game. But let's not get it twisted. Although the splits do look concerning on surface level, the 8.6 targets per game would have paced for a 146 target, 17-game pace, and his 77.6 receiving yards per game still would have paced for about 1,319 receiving yards. He just ran completely dry on touchdowns in this stretch. 12 touchdowns in his first 11 games of the season, of the 2022 season. 0 touchdowns in his last 6 games. So despite his advanced stage, I still think he's worth a mid-first round pick in redraft leagues. Obviously gives you that positional advantage having that stud tight end that can compete with all of the best wide receivers in fantasy, barring maybe the top 4 that I just mentioned that go ahead of him in ADP. The 107 is going to be Stefon Diggs, wide receiver of the Buffalo Bills, wide receiver 5 in ADP, 107 overall, like I mentioned. And for the truth of his season, we look at his splits prior to Josh Allen suffering that UCL injury in his elbow that really hindered him for the rest of the season. You guys can see he had a huge impact in terms of Stefon Diggs' output in fantasy football. So his overall seasonal output, 18.9 PPR points per game, ranked as the wide receiver 5 in points per game in the 17 games he played. When you look at the split when Josh Allen was fully healthy in those first 8 games, this was a legitimate near 25 PPR point per game wide receiver. Oddly enough, that 24.8 PPR point per game total completely matches what Cooper Kupp was doing at the beginning of the season. I still remember in that first half of the season, we were talking about the league winners like the likes of Cooper Kupp, Stefon Diggs, Justin Jefferson. Obviously, Cooper Kupp gets injured. Stefon Diggs gets affected by the Josh Allen injury. It's clear to me that he was on his way to a completely elite year with Josh Allen at full strength. A 17-game pace, get this, 134 receptions, 1,855 receiving yards, and 17 receiving touchdowns on 177 targets. His ceiling is as a league winner wide receiver for one of the most potent offenses in the NFL. And in my opinion, he's someone that is well worth this mid-first round price tag in fantasy drafts. I personally would prefer the other 4 slightly, but I do think once you come down to the 105, 106, 107 area, Stefon Diggs is a mighty fine pick in that area because I do think that I would prefer him relative to the rest of the wide receiver landscape, given that 24.8 PPR point per game type of upside. Like I said, we saw at the first half of the season in 2022. Move on to the 108, and that's going to be Austin Ekeler, running back for the Los Angeles Chargers. RB2 off the board, 108 overall, like I said. And for the truth of his season, we look at his splits with the Chargers wide receivers at full health. Obviously, Mike Williams and Keenan Allen both missing times, both banged up at certain points of the 2022 season. How did it affect Austin Ekeler's overall output? And you guys can see his seasonal output, 21.7 PPR points per game, ranked as the RB1 in fantasy in the 17 games he played. His split output, though, when these wide receivers were healthy, still averaged over 21 PPR points per game at 21.32. And what the split tells us is that although it's right to expect a target decrease from Ekeler's seasonal pace, 8.67 targets per game outside of the split, 4.6 targets per game inside of it, the overall effect on the offense is positive. When these wide receivers are healthy, Ekeler received a big uptick in scoring opportunity. You guys see 1.2 rushing touchdowns per game in this stretch. And while some people may argue, well, 1.2 touchdowns per game, that's hard to expect from anybody. Austin Ekeler over the last 3 years has shown he scores touchdowns at a well above average rate in the NFL. If this guy plays 17 games, he's a threat for 20 overall touchdowns from scrimmage. So, like I said, while the receiving output may go down, again, 8.67 versus 4.6 in this stretch, I do think that his knack for scoring touchdowns is going to result in him being well worth the investment as the RB1 in a high-powered offense in the middle to back end of your first round. Like I kind of said, I do view McCaffrey, Ekeler, and the other running back on this list or going in the first round to be in a tier together. So while we do see right now McCaffrey going at 103 and Ekeler not coming off till the 108, I do think those guys should only be separated by about 1 or 2 picks. But moving off of Austin Ekeler, we head on to the 109, and that is going to be A.J. Brown of the Philadelphia Eagles, wide receiver, going off the board as the wide receiver 6, and like I said, 109 overall. So for the truth of his season, we look at his splits with a healthy Goddard and a healthy Hurts on the field for the Philadelphia Eagles offense, and we do see that it doesn't really have a huge effect on his seasonal output. His seasonal output goes from 17.6 PPR points per game to about 17.2 PPR points per game when both those guys were healthy. We do see a slight downtick in terms of his overall target share, goes from 29% to about 27.35% in this split. But we do see that he's pretty much still that same dominant wide receiver regardless of the target competition. In my opinion, though, he's more so worth, a top of the second, late first round type of pick. But there are a few wide receivers going behind him right now that I personally would prefer. We're going to get into one on this list specifically as the next player that we talk about that I would prefer straight up to A.J. Brown, and is someone that you can get a couple picks cheaper in drafts right now. The 110 would have been Bijan Robinson, rookie running back of the Atlanta Falcons, as the RB3 off the board. But obviously, I can't pull any truth from his 2022 season because he is entering his rookie season in the NFL. He's going to be a fun name to dissect next year on this show. 111 is going to be CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver of the Dallas Cowboys, my beloved Dallas Cowboys. You guys see the jerseys hanging in the background. Going off the board is the wide receiver 7 overall, 111 in ADP right now, according to Underdog Fantasy. And for the truth of his 2022 season, we look at his splits once Dak Prescott returned in week 7. So his overall seasonal output, 17.7 PPR points per game, barely edged out A.J. Brown in this regard, finishing as the wide receiver 7, like I said, in PPR points per game. But in this split with a healthy Dak Prescott in the tail end of the season, this guy averaged 19.8 PPR points per game. What the split tells us, Dak Prescott's return to the lineup turned what was a very, very strong wide receiver 1 caliber season for Lamb into what is a league-winning caliber wide receiver 1 overall season, finishing as the wide receiver 4 across a full season in PPR points per game. This stretch, once Dak Prescott came back, it was pretty simple that having his starting quarterback was crucial to Lamb's weekly upside, and it offered him far more ceiling when he was playing with Dak Prescott to what any week Cooper Rush could have offered him at the quarterback position. And I do think at this current price tag, at the 111, Lamb is an easy smash at the end of the first. And in my opinion, he's a good bet to join that elite wide receiver 1 group following another season of building off what he displayed in 2022. If you were to tell me come 2024 ADP, CeeDee Lamb was going as the 105, 106 off the board relative to where, Stefon Diggs, Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill are going right now, I would not be shocked. He's got that talent level on his side. He's got the youth factor on his side, and he's got the offensive success, a potential top 5 offense in Dallas on his side. Finally, we head on to the 112, the last player card of the video, and that's going to be Garrett Wilson, second-year wide receiver of the New York Jets, going off the board as the wide receiver 8 overall, and like I said, 112 overall on Underdog ADP. And for the truth of his season, we look at his splits without Zach Wilson as his starting quarterback, and you guys can see his overall seasonal output goes from 12.4 PPR points per game, spikes all the way up to 17.22 PPR points per game, which actually equated A.J. Brown's splits when he played with a healthy Hurts and a healthy Dallas Goedert on the team last year. So clearly we do see that Zach Wilson was such a hindrance to Garrett Wilson's bottom line, and 17.22 PPR points per game would have been a phenomenal rookie season up there with the likes of guys like Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, all of those other league-winning caliber players. Garrett Wilson would have been talked about in the same vein. So, like I said, he could have had that Justin Jefferson level breakout as a rookie, but unfortunately for him, even when Zach Wilson wasn't throwing the football, Joe Flacco and Mike White, they're fine backups. But now Aaron Rodgers comes in and could potentially unlock a higher gear for Garrett Wilson. I get it. The price does feel relatively high compared to what we've seen from past year's breakouts. Justin Jefferson in 2021, following his breakout rookie year, I believe was only going at the back end of the second round. Guys like A.J. Brown, DK Metcalf were completely mispriced in 2020. However, although it does seem high right now, I do think that this 1-2 turn pick for Garrett Wilson is about appropriate. I think the ceiling here, quite literally, is a Devontae Adams-esque level dominance. We saw what Aaron Rodgers was able to do. If he can unlock that 2020, 2021 level MVP play that we've seen from Aaron Rodgers in the past, Garrett Wilson could be well on his way of, 110 receptions, 1,500 plus receiving yards, 10 plus receiving touchdowns, on one of the most improved passing attacks in the NFL for the Jets going from 2022 to 2023. Because Aaron Rodgers is that type of quarterback that can get that level of play from his wide receiver 1. But either way, if you guys enjoyed this video and you feel like you got some value from it, make sure you leave a like down below and subscribe if you're new to the channel. All the player cards from today's video and all of the coming videos in this Truth series will be made available over on flockfantasy.com. Using promo code FSC will get you 30% off your subscription to the site and complete access to these player cards, along with all of mine and Corey's rankings, trade value charts, any study we do along the offseason, along with priority access for future Dynasty Decisions episodes. By using our code FSC specifically, if you sign up annually right now, you guys can also get a free Zoom consultation with myself or Corey, and we can talk about whatever you want to talk about. Dynasty strategy, live Dynasty Decisions breakdown, prepping for your guys' rookie drafts if you haven't had them yet, advice for your redraft league, or even having the consultation while you're on the clock in your home league. Whatever it is, we will be happy to talk it through with you. Also, all the ADP in today's video comes from Underdog Fantasy. If you guys want to get some skin in the game, if you notice an interesting trend from today's video, maybe you love Cooper Kupp at his value right now. Maybe you love CeeDee Lamb's breakout potential. Whatever you found interesting from the video, you guys can go over to Underdog Fantasy, get some skin in the game, and have the ultimate preparation for your guys' home redraft leagues with the sharpest ADP out there on the market currently. 100% match back on first deposit up to $100 using promo code FSE, and using our code will get you full access to our redraft rankings manifesto and cheat sheet once they come out in the next coming weeks, as well as all of our weekly rankings throughout the 2023 regular season to help you come home with that fantasy football championship. Both of those codes are linked in the description as well. But with that being said, peace out and enjoy your Thursday.